American Public Media.
Visit Gainesville, Alachua County, just a short drive away, where visitors can find family fun with hands-on discovery at the Cade Museum, art exploration at the Harn Museum, and splash time joy at Depot Park. More at visitgainesville.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team. Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Israel has given final approval to build thousands of new homes in the occupied West Bank. Critics say the long-delayed settlement project will bury the chances of a Palestinian state. NPR's Jackie Northam reports from Tel Aviv.
The so-called E1 settlement project has been on the drawing board for more than 2 decades, but pressure from the U.S. and other nations prevented it from becoming a reality until now. The controversial development, which involves more than 3,400 housing units, will be built on a tract of land east of Jerusalem, effectively slicing the West Bank in two. The Palestinian Authority called the development illegal and said it would destroy the chance of a two-state solution. Israel's ultra-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, who approved the plans, said the E1 settlements will erase any notion of a Palestinian state. The number of settlements has quickly grown over the past few years, despite international condemnation. Jackie Northam, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
Uganda's government says it's agreed to a deal with the Trump administration to take foreign migrants deported from the U.S. Yesterday, the East African country denied knowledge of the agreement, as NPR's Jewel Bright reports.
Uganda's foreign ministry says the deal with the U.S. has been concluded, and officials from both countries are now working out a plan to implement it. Officials say unaccompanied children and migrants with criminal records will not be allowed into Uganda under the agreement. This is the third migrant deportation agreement between the U.S. and an African country, following deals with Rwanda and the Kingdom of Eswatini. Critics have accused the Trump administration of forcing African countries to accept deportees from third countries. Last month, Nigeria's foreign minister said the U.S. was trying to use his country and others in Africa as a dumping ground for third country deportees. Joel Bright, NPR News, Lagos.
The Texas State House has passed a measure to redraw the state's congressional maps. The Republican plan seeks to flip 5 Democratic seats in the U.S. House to Republican control. The move would increase the GOP's power in Congress. Now, Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis wants the Trump administration to give his state an additional congressional seat in the U.S. House. He claims Florida's census results were not accurate and Florida is owed this seat.
The Attorney General has written a letter to the Census Bureau, the Commerce Department, copying the White House, saying, please fix this remuneration and award Florida what we're entitled to, an extra seat in Congress.
This move could add another Republican to the U.S. Congress. Meanwhile, in California, state lawmakers will take up a Democratic plan today. It seeks to redraw California's congressional districts. This is an effort to flip 5 Republican seats in that state to Democratic control. You're listening to NPR.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It is 9:04. The 50-year-old Orange Park Mall has a new owner. Second Horizon Capital announced its purchase of the 950,000-square-foot mall on Wells Road yesterday. The new owner says it plans to immediately work on enhancements, including the mall's safety and infrastructure, expand the mall's programming calendar, and work on getting more local partnerships to support its role as a community hub. Second Horizon Capital is based in Boca Raton and has hired Jacksonville-based CBRE for property management and leasing. Governor Ron DeSantis has posthumously awarded the Governor's Medal of Freedom to 5 notable Floridians. The medal is one of the state's highest honors. Those recognized include two former Democratic governors, Buddy McKay and Bob Graham, former Florida State University President John Thrasher, former Congressman Lincoln Diaz-Balart, and Jimmy Buffett, the singer who turned a beach bum lifestyle into an empire. DeSantis says the five exemplify what it means to be a great Floridian. Part of the Florida lifestyle is heading to the beach, and today is not a good beach day. We still have dangerous surf and a high chance for rip currents through the day due to Hurricane Erin that is moving away from the east coast of the U.S. Highs will reach the low to mid-90s, even along the coast, and showers and storms are expected to break out across inland areas this afternoon and into the evening. Lows will drop down into the 70s overnight.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Progressive Insurance with Snapshot, a personalized program that bases rates on safe driving habits, at progressive.com. Not available in California or from all agents. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, will Florida join the national redistricting hustle over congressional boundaries? We'll be discussing that along with the burgeoning city budget battle in our monthly news breakdown with attorney, author, and government expert Chris Hand. Later, 4 city neighborhoods are the focus of a new program encouraging kids to ditch their devices and embrace the environment. But first, Chris Hand, it is great to have you back, and I'm starting to think that a monthly visit is not nearly often enough to catch up on.
And good to see you again, as always. Yeah, a lot has happened just in the last couple of weeks, never mind the last month.
Not to mention just even overnight. One thing I wanted to just kind of at least briefly touch on is news that our colleagues at the Jacksonville Daily Record reported on really just kind of in the last few hours. This settlement, basically a Department of Justice settlement that the Department of Justice has now backed away from, a redlining issue that they had basically been pursuing Ameris Bank over and had reached this consent decree. Can you just kind of catch us up on what that was about and what we know now?
Sure. During the Biden administration, when Merrick Garland was the Attorney General, one of the big areas of focus for the Justice Department was economic opportunity and equality of economic opportunity. They targeted what are called redlining practices. Redlining is illegal. That is practices where financial institutions do not extend services to particular neighborhoods or areas, particularly neighborhoods or areas that are majority minority. That's been a practice that's been illegal for years. During Mr. Garland's time as Attorney General, the Justice Department really focused on that, and in October of 2023 reached a settlement with Ameris Bank, which used to be based here in Jacksonville, now based in Atlanta, over what it claimed were discriminatory practices. Ameris denied those allegations, but entered into a consent decree to take some remedial action. That included a $7.5 million loan subsidy fund that they would extend, another $1.5 million for outreach in the community, also a promise to open branches in some of the areas here in Northeast Florida where they were claimed to have committed discriminatory practices. Well, now, not quite 2 years later at this point, obviously new presidential administration, new Justice Department, new Attorney General. They have told the U.S. Federal District Court that Ameris Bank has essentially complied with the consent decree and asked for court approval that it be withdrawn at this point. So, again, sort of a change in, this happens in administrations, a change in focus, but a pretty big settlement less than 2 years ago. Now the Justice Department is asking the court to approve the removal of the consent decree.
And it sounds like, surprisingly, I mean, while this was, as you said, Merrick Garland basically came to town, it was a big, announcement and a pretty huge settlement. Meanwhile, the decision to kind of pull that back has been pretty quiet. I mean, we understand that Judge Marcia Morales Howard here in the district court, in May, kind of co-signing the request from the Department of Justice to say, okay, we're going to allow this to be, I don't know if nullified is the correct word, but resolved.
Well, and I think it'll be important to track, and I mean, obviously we're focused on this particular settlement because it was sort of, based here in Jacksonville. As you say, the former Attorney General came here and made an announcement here in Jacksonville. But I think it's also interesting to track nationally. What does this mean for those policies that were in place during the previous era in the Justice Department. There were settlements and consent decrees of this kind in other parts of the country as well. So I think that'll be one kind of issue for people who follow these issues to track. Is this part of a larger policy withdrawal from these sorts of consent decrees or consent decrees in general? Or does it just affect this particular settlement? We'll have to track that over time.
Sure, and I guess we know there have been some other terminations in under this administration, including with police departments, like in Minneapolis, where there had been this consent decree. Now, Minneapolis says they're still going to follow the outlines of that consent decree, but and also with New York's Mayor Eric Adams, that there's been kind of a reversal on prosecuting him. So there definitely have been some changes with this administration.
Well, and the tool of the consent decree is something that the Department of Justice has utilized for decades. Particularly, again, a consent decree is not a criminal penalty. It is an agreement that the Justice Department enters into with some entity. It could be a government. In the past, they've done that with a variety of governments over issues in terms of like access for people with disabilities and those types of issues. They can be with private organizations, like in the case of Ameris Bank here, or other institutions that they believe are committing discriminatory or illegal practices. So I think one big issue to watch over time is the consent decree has been a tool the Justice Department has used for years to ensure enforcement and compliance with a variety of federal types of federal law. Is that practice going to be dialed back overall during the current Justice Department? We've got about 6 months of data that suggests that there may be some, minimization of that tactic right now. We'll have to see going forward whether that overall approach continues to be dialed back.
Just so I'm clear, a consent decree, I mean, typically runs its course. So the idea of pulling out of a dissent decree that's in place is somewhat unusual.
That's right. Typically, a consent decree has a variety of requirements that, the entity entering into it has to accomplish before the consent decree can be lifted. It effectively ends or is withdrawn once all of those terms, have been complied with. So, again, I think it's going to be interesting to track over time. Does the Justice Department just use this tool less than it has in the past? It's something that DOJ for years has used frequently. This may or may not signal that they are going to use that tool less frequently during this administration.
All right, important story, and we'll continue to follow it. But I do want to shift gears to talk about the city council and the budget. There's a lot of headlines coming out of city council, this budget process, and conflict with the mayor's office. One element of that has to do with seemingly kind of a I don't know, insignificant issue, which is how many tickets are given to city officials from various entities that are run by the city, whether it's, the ViStar or the stadium or the ballpark. They get tickets. It's usually fairly just insular, I think, but it's become a matter of public debate in the last couple of weeks. Possibly because of this increased tension between the mayor's office and the city council. It sounds like perhaps there was a question of who was going to get the tickets. Were they being fairly distributed? The city council evidently believed that they were getting shortchanged.
Well, first of all, Ann, I want to thank you for taking me back to a very joyful period of my life, and that was the city council, 4 years with the city council budget season. This is kind of typically a period of year where, look, under our charter, the city council owns kind of the millage rate and the budget. They have the responsibility each year for setting what the property tax rate's going to be, and ultimately they decide what the city budget's going to be. The mayor proposes a budget. The mayor has some line item veto authority once council passes a budget, but council kind of owns the budget under the charter. And so council takes a very proprietary interest in that document. Now, different councils have taken different approaches to how they sort of manage that philosophy. This particular council has taken a much more aggressive approach as it, pertains to kind of the budgets that Mayor Deegan and her team have proposed and how they're responding to that. Sometimes that's over issues that seem somewhat more substantive. Other times it's over issues that I think probably members of the public scratch their head a little bit and thinking about why are we having fights over this? You've identified one of the big ones, which is the issue of how the city distributes the tickets it gets from the Jaguars as part of its agreements. Just so people understand this background, over time, as people know, the city has entered into a variety of agreements with the Jacksonville Jaguars, whether that's to build the stadium or to do stadium renovations or just sort of manage the stadium over time. There's a stadium and event manager that the city, works with as well on that. Well, as part of that process, the city of Jacksonville gets a tranche of tickets to Jaguars games. It also owns a box at the stadium where city officials can use those. You don't typically see this issue sort of bubble up at the council level, but apparently there is some disagreement over how those tickets should be distributed. This is one of those issues that really is classic insider baseball. Again, I have to imagine, Ann, that a lot of folks who are watching the budget process are just sort of perplexed as to why, when the city's dealing with a $2 billion budget, there's a variety of challenges that exist in the city, from continuing effects of inflation to obviously issues of affordable and attainable housing. And the city has big issues on its plate. So it's been interesting to see this take up a lot of bandwidth. The most recent development in this, as you know, is the council president, Kevin Carrico, who was on this show not long ago, has proposed an amendment that would essentially eliminate any of these tickets being able to go to elected officials, which might resolve that for once and for all. But it has been interesting during this budget season to see the issues that have gotten attention. Obviously, kind of the big ticket item has been city council, or at least some city council members, wanting to cut the millage rate from what the mayor proposed by 1/8 of a mill, which would result in their need to find about $13 million in spending cuts. But what some of those cuts have been, and some of the issues that have sort of spawned from that, I think have been surprising to people, that they've touched on matters like Meals on Wheels or access to health care, or now Jaguars tickets, which is sort of a tangential issue coming out of some of these budget debates. So, again, it's not unusual for the mayor's office and the city council to spar over the budget, particularly when budgets begin to decrease, particularly when there's some differences in maybe political party or ideology between the two branches. I think what's been surprising this year is the specific issues that have been at the heart of that debate.
We're talking to Chris Hand about the latest state and local headlines, and you're welcome to join our conversation. You can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or X at FCC On Air. We've got a call from Mark on the west side. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Well, this may be a tangential issue to some, but it just makes my blood boil. It is such a bribe, especially with the Jaguars. I mean, they've got a set of box seats, and Shad Khan is up there, and they're up there together, and they're talking about this or that. How can that not be a violation of the Sunshine Rule to begin with? And again, Shad Khan, every few couple of years, comes to us hat in hand, wanting the taxpayers to cough up $10 million or $20 million or $1 billion. How can that not be seen as a bribe? And I understand. What I don't understand is how these elected officials, who have to go through some sort of ethics training, I'm sure, don't see that as such. Pure and simple. And even, let's say, under the best of circumstances, it's not a bribe. It stinks of a bribe. It looks like a bribe. And they should just make a blanket statement that we won't accept this. This is wrong. It appears to be wrong. So, do away with it.
Thanks, Mark. Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, and Mark, just to be clear, when I talked about tangential, I meant tangential to the budget, because these tickets don't necessarily have huge budgetary implications. But I think Mark raises a good point. A lot of people are concerned about some of these optics, particularly kind of given the fact that the city is now making a nearly $1 billion contribution to a new Jaguar stadium. So again, tangential in the sense that this isn't a direct budget issue, but is something that I think the optics are sort of challenging. That may be why President Carrico this week came out with his amendment to kind of end this practice altogether, sort of reflecting to some extent the sentiment that Mark is talking about. There had been an earlier amendment that former Council President Ron Salomon introduced that would sort of change the way these tickets are distributed between the mayor's office and the city council's office. And by the way, these are not necessarily mayor's offices, and city council members sometimes give these to nonprofit organizations or others. It's not necessarily for people's personal use. But to Mark's point, the optics can be challenging on that, which has been interesting. That makes it sort of interesting. This is an issue where council has decided to, kind of plant its sword in the ground.
I want to ask you about you said that, Kevin Carrico has proposed an amendment. It would do away with all of these tickets. It is an amendment to a measure introduced by former City Council President Ron Salem. According to Salem, at the request of the council president, Kevin Carrico. And that kind of raises this whole other issue of a different set of optics about how council members are communicating and whether they're doing it in a public forum as the Sunshine Law requires. I want to take a listen to what Councilmember Ron Salem, told our colleagues at News for Jax when he was asked about this matter the other day.
So President Carrico was involved in something with the mayor's office and asked me to draft legislation that would split everything. We're a co-equal branch of this government so that we can get our share and pass them on to our constituents and such as well.
And so he's saying there that Carrico asked him to draft this legislation specifically because he wanted to split these tickets more evenly between the council and the mayor's office. There has already been a complaint filed with the state attorney's office, questions raised about council members texting the council president during meetings to ask about procedural matters, and concerns by the complainant, Leslie Jean Bart, who's a local attorney and the president of the Democratic Black Caucus for Duval County, saying that's a violation of the Sunshine Law. This additional matter then kind of piling onto that. Now, we're going to have Leslie Jean Bart on the program next week, and we'll ask her about this. But her contention is that council members are having substantive discussions about policy matters out of the sunshine. Do you think that this instance where Ron Salem's talking about being asked by the council president to introduce legislation with the goal of splitting tickets more evenly, does that sound problematic to you?
I think without knowing kind of more facts at this point, Ann, because there are situations at times where council presidents will say, I want someone to kind of tackle a particular subject and I want them to sort of pursue legislation on it without necessarily directing exactly what that legislation should say. For everyone's, I mean, I think most people have kind of awareness of how this works, but under, Florida law, the Sunshine Law, members of deliberative bodies like the city council cannot conduct public business or kind of have conversations about substantive legislation that might come before the council unless that occurs in a noticed meeting where the public is informed of that meeting, has an opportunity to attend. And that's been, I think, some of the concerns that have been raised. This is something that comes up with a variety of legislative bodies. In fact, as you may know, the St. Augustine Airport Authority is now missing 3 members for a very similar issue because they were indicted for that and, had to resign from the board. And so it's something that, the law enforcement and others take seriously. But it is very fact specific in terms of exactly what happened in the instance, what was discussed. Was this just procedural, scheduling, something else that doesn't fall into the category of a substantive conversation about matters that will come before the body? And so there's a lot of facts that go into that sort of determination. So I think it's a little too early to tell what's involved here. There has been a history at the Jacksonville City Council in years past. Back about 20 years ago, there was a scandal involving city council members having meetings outside of the sunshine to discuss legislation. The state attorney's office, then led by Harry Shorstein, took a look at that issue. A number of council members ended up paying what amounted to be civil fines, for, some of these conversations. So it is something that people look at over time, but it is very fact and issue specific in terms of what those conversations might have been. Look, just as a best practice, it's really as a best practice if council members are dealing with legislation. Number one, a best practice because at the top of the organizational chart at the city of Jacksonville is the citizenry, the people. So if there are discussions about issues, if there's any question at all, a best practice is always to have that in the public, to have a publicly noticed meeting, or to have that conversation at a regularly scheduled council meeting where the public has an opportunity to attend and weigh in. If in doubt, make it public.
And we should say we don't know as yet if the state attorney's office has responded to that request or endeavored to take an investigation or to begin an investigation. We have reached out to the state attorney's office, and we'll try to update people with more when we know more. We've got a call from Moselle in Avondale. Good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I just want to say, again, it's like a sunny place for shady people. My head's exploding. These frat boys on city council groveling for free anything. And tickets, come on, get to damn work. People are sleeping on the streets. You know, they're cutting Meals on Wheels. Come on, y'all. Tickets, I mean, they should be given. They should be given to nonprofits. They should be given to, you know, random lottery chosen people. Certainly not elected officials. I mean, if they need to us to do a GoFundMe to help them raise money to buy a ticket, ask for GoFundMe so they can go to a Ducks game. They're pathetic, and they should be ashamed. There's no shame. Bring back shame.
Thanks, Roselle. I mean, we should talk a little bit about some of the proposed cuts, Chris, because they're real. They're happening right now. And Meals on Wheels is one of them. The city council proposing to cut what the budget request was by $1.9 million, which, according to the city, would drop the number of basic elderly people who are eligible for Meals on Wheels down to under 1,000 people, and basically leaving another 1,900 people without.
That has been one aspect of this kind of debate between the mayor's office and the city council, and that has been, I think, a bit unusual. I think city council members are always very well advised to pick their battles carefully. There's also a good piece of advice that I think is good life advice, which is don't cut off your nose to spite your face. And I think one thing we have seen in this particular budget year is council making some unusual choices as to where they want to make stands in this budget process. Meals on Wheels is an extraordinarily impactful and popular program that serves a lot of seniors who are in need. And you know, as I think people who have said during this debate and just say generally, it's one of the most efficient and biggest return on investments people can make in seniors because of the importance of quality nutrition toward senior health. So a very popular program, and not just popular in people who receive Meals on Wheels, but also from volunteers and others. It's a place where a lot of people choose to serve. So again, it's been a little puzzling that in a $2 billion budget, that this is a place where council sort of has decided to make its stand, particularly where there are going to be a number of impacts from this. I think council's contention is, well, over the last year, we funded Meals on Wheels more than we have in the past, so we're just sort of dialing that back to historic levels. Well, be that as it may, there are going to be a number of people who were taken off the Meals on Wheels wait list who are going to go back on it as a result of this cut. A bit of an unusual place for council to make its stand. Also, cutting funding for people who are uninsured to be able to have access to healthcare services, to medical care. Another sort of unusual place for council to sort of make its stand in this process.
But they are going to have to find some place to cut, right? I mean, they are looking at clearing space for $13 million for these proposed property tax rollbacks.
Right, and remember, we're dealing with a $2 billion budget. No question that if council decreases the millage rate, it's going to have to figure out where to find that money. But there are, as someone who worked closely with the city budget for 4 years and obviously has followed it closely since then, there are a number of places in the budget that I think are much more likely to yield savings than some of these individual programs. What most of these seem to have in common is that, you know, they were proposed in the mayor's budget and they're part of the mayor's priorities. And that's what council seems to be targeting rather than going through the larger exercise of we have a $2 billion budget. Are there potentially places we can save money? And I would argue that there almost certainly are. In a $2 billion budget, there are clearly places you can save money. But the places where you can save money in a $2 billion budget are usually much more expansive than just some of these individual programs that happen to be proposed in the mayor's budget.
All right. I do want to shift gears and talk about redistricting because, as we know, the Texas House voted Thursday, just yesterday, about to implement a newly drawn congressional map that is designed specifically to favor Republicans in the next set of elections in the midterms. And there's discussion about other states that could follow suit. California sort of expected to, although it might be a little bit more of a difficult ride than Texas. And Texas still has to be finalized. But Florida could be one of those states. What are the implications? Remind us, why redistricting matters to ordinary folk.
Well, because it very much controls, who controls the U.S. House of Representatives. Just so as everyone remembers, the process is or is supposed to be. We have a census every 10 years in this country to kind of determine what the U.S. population is. Based on the results of that census, we apportion 435 congressional seats among kind of different states based on population shifts. Florida is a state that has repeatedly gained seats in the last several censuses because the state is still growing, and then where those seats are apportioned because of different political allegiances and voting behavior very much determines who controls the U.S. House of Representatives. That used to be a once every decade process where that reapportionment would occur. State legislatures would meet, they would draw House districts. Those districts would then, have some judicial scrutiny to determine whether they were compliant with federal law and otherwise go into place, and then people would elect their representatives. What has occurred more recently is that you have what are called mid-cycle redistrictings, where even though there hasn't been a new census, legislatures around the country will go through a redistricting process for one reason or another. What's different now in 2025 is really, frankly, Ann, just how naked the kind of partisanship of the process is at this point. President Trump, again, the control of the U.S. House of Representatives really is on the razor's edge. Republicans have a very slim majority right now. So I think there's concern that in 2026, if you're on the Republican side, the control might flip back to the Democrats, which is not unusual when you have one party in charge of the White House. It's not unusual for another party to ultimately gain control of Congress. In an effort to potentially forestall that, President Trump encouraged the state of Texas to redraw its lines and create up to 5 new Republican congressional districts in Texas. Now, that's not a guarantee. Voters ultimately, at the end of the day, will decide who occupy those seats, but based on past voting behavior, those seats are more likely than not going to be Republican. That has touched off a response from other states around the country. So in California, as you say, Governor Gavin Newsom has announced that he is going to seek, they're going to have a special legislative session. He is going to seek a constitutional amendment in California that would allow them to have a mid-cycle redistricting, which would essentially negate the effect of what Texas does by redrawing their lines to have 5 new Democratic seats. Well, now you're seeing that race around the country. The Trump administration's been talking to the state of Indiana about potentially kind of redrawing their lines. The state of New York, which tends to lean Democratic, has been trying to figure out ways to redraw their lines. And now here in Florida, the governor has said that he thinks a redistricting would be appropriate. Keep in mind, Florida just drew its district lines 3 years ago.
And that was a litigious, long process.
Right, which really has sort of just concluded. There was kind of rulings just in the last, month or so that have finally concluded that process. And now there's discussion about doing it again. Florida does seem to be on a slower pace than some of the other states. House Speaker Danny Perez has announced kind of a select committee on redistricting to kind of take a look at congressional districts. We don't know yet what the pace of that's going to be. It doesn't seem like that's sort of at a breakneck pace, but we'll find out soon whether Florida is truly committed to that. One thing that may influence this is Florida has an early legislative session in 2026. The way under our state constitution, in even number years, the legislature meets from January to March rather than from March to May. So the legislature will be reconvening again very soon. This could be an issue they take up in the 2026 legislature, which if they do, and again, it passes all judicial scrutiny, might mean Florida has a new map for the 2026 congressional elections.
We've got a call from Lisa in Orange Park on this subject. Good morning, Lisa. Go ahead.
Hi, yes, good morning. My question is that Donald Trump is saying that he wants to recount the census and not include people who are not American citizens. So if that's true, then the number of our population will decrease. So will that not decrease the amount of representatives? So isn't all this redistricting then going to be kind of pointless?
It's a good question. It does get complicated. I mean,
It is a very complicated process. I think this issue, you're right, the president has suggested that maybe they should do sort of a mid-cycle census. I think that may run into some constitutional problems as the Constitution sort of sets forth that when the country is supposed to decide, supposed to have a census, there's federal law that implements
and
that.
who's supposed to be included.
Exactly right. And so that there are a variety of the law deals with the federal law, deals with that at a variety of different places. So it's not something that an administration just has the power to say we're going to kind of do this and do it separately. It also is an expensive process that involves appropriations as well. To one of the points the caller raised, would this shrink the number of representatives? The answer is no. Right now, the number in the House of Representatives is fixed at 435, and that is just sort of reapportioned again every 10 years, when we currently do the census. That could be changed, the number in the House of Representatives. That would require legal action. There have been some suggestions over time that perhaps we need to grow the House of Representatives, since that fixed number has been in place for a long time.
I mean, it wouldn't overall shrink, but could it shrink in Florida if we weren't to count for instance, the population of people who don't have full legal status?
It could certainly change in a variety of states depending on what the parameters of the census are. But again, changing those parameters of the census is a lengthy legal process that isn't just accomplished by executive order or fiat or some other sort of quick process. It would have to go through Congress. Some would argue that it would require a constitutional amendment in some cases and would certainly have judicial scrutiny. So the process of changing the census is not something that can or would happen overnight, just given some of the legal parameters that are there.
Does it in some ways feel to you, Chris, like they're just lifting the veil on the partisan goals or just really the political aspect of our voting process? Because I think a lot of people look to a partisan redistricting as politicians selecting their voters as opposed to voters selecting their elected officials. It seems to really make it a much more end-driven and sort of a fait accompli when it comes to an outcome. It seems much more transactional, I guess.
Yeah, I think some would argue that legislatures have been doing this for years, selecting their voters rather than voters selecting their representatives. I think one thing that's very different about what's happening right now is that it's happening mid-cycle, right? That it's happening not in 2022 or 2032, if we want to look ahead, which is when this process typically occurs, but we're having conversations about it in 2025. I think what's also different about this is, like I said earlier, just how naked and transparent the goals of this process are. The idea behind redistricting is to make sure that every citizen of a particular state lives in a district of equal size, has representation. There's supposed to be some equality of opportunity in that process. Now we have these redistricting happen, which are for the blunt stated reason of trying to impact control of the United States House of Representatives, after the 2026 election. That is a very different type of language than we have seen in the past as it relates to redistricting. There's been all sorts of things discussed in that regard. But now no one's even attempting to hide what the goals are, and the goals are partisan control of the U.S. House of Representatives. The timing of that and the messaging of this process, even if those were goals in the past, they've never been so explicitly stated as they are now.
We've got a call from Jason in San Marco. Good morning, Jason. Go ahead.
Good morning. Really enjoying this show. You guys sort of stole my thunder a little bit, but the points I wanted to make are, number one, Trump is operating out of fear. And I really wish that the national media would pump that narrative, because everyone looking at any poll sees he's about to get his rear end kicked in the midterms. He's operating from fear. Number two, I want to say is that Donald Trump is opposing mail-in ballots, which is utterly ridiculous considering that's how he's voted the last several years. If Democrats were shown to be using paper ballots, then he would be against that. It's another absolutely patently ridiculous point of view that he's taking. And the third thing I want to say, and you just hinted on it, was that it seems to me that if they go into a census and start very carefully counting people who are not citizens, who don't have proper immigration status, that Texas and Florida are going to take a big hit, because they have to be home to large populations of Hispanic people who have questionable citizenship status. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Thanks, Jason. We also have a call from Karen in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Karen. Go ahead.
Good morning. Love your program. Absolutely. I'm going to go back a bit, because I'd like to bring up the point about 8 to 10 of our city council members are all shown and listed in our local newspaper as being millionaires. And, they all make over $100,000 in salary to be on the city council. And to me, if they seem so concerned about our budget and are going to be cutting things like Meals on Wheels and very needed, safety nets, why don't they just give up their salaries or at least cut it way back? Why do they need that much money? And the money, instead of taking the salary, those could be put towards Meals on Wheels and other needed safety nets. Just a thought.
Thank you. Chris, you're shaking your head, though. The salary is not quite that much.
No, certainly we can have debate about these different budget items, but just to sort of make sure this is grounded in facts, council members do not make more than $100,000 a year. In fact, they make much less. They are paid as part-time city council members. Many of them work far more than part-time schedules. They work, frankly, more than full-time schedules.
Maybe a little more than half that. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, certainly in the mid five figures, certainly not in the six figures. I don't know, with some of the adjustments, and some council members have turned aside some of the kind of automatic raises that have occurred. So no, I do want to clear up that council members, and again, I'm not an expert on what individuals' personal wealth is, but in terms of the salary they receive from the city of Jacksonville, it is not a six-figure salary. They are really paid as sort of part-time employees, even though many of them work full-time schedules.
And she may have meant just that salary from council augments their other salary and that they're all ultimately fairly well off.
Right.
So to that point, I guess she's asking, did you have any thoughts about the redistricting question that we got regarding undocumented folks, or whether that would impact Florida in a potential census?
I think, and again, I don't know if any models have been run about potential census changes and how they might sort of impact kind of redistricting in different states. It'd be interesting to see if that occurred. Again, it is such a laborious process to go through making some of these changes in federal law that would be required, number one, to have a census mid-cycle, which is not, again, how it's currently specified, to be done once a decade at the beginning of a decade.
And it's not cheap.
No, it is a very expensive undertaking for the federal government to do. Important for a number of reasons, not just in terms of redistricting, but as to how federal funds are distributed. There are a variety of very important reasons that we do a census every 10 years. It isn't just about where congressional districts are located, but it is a monumental undertaking. Typically, lots of volunteers are involved. There are some sampling methods that can be used now, but it's a big, big federal government project, not easily undertaken more than once a decade, both because of the person power involved, because of the cost involved, and to make changes like some of the ones we're talking about today, the legal process involved as well. So I don't know if models like that have been done. It would be interesting to see that. If this becomes more of a conversation, I'm sure there'll be even more of a focus on what some of the consequences or implications could be.
I do just want to briefly touch on the question of whether the Duval County School Board will be relocating its headquarters from the South Bank down more towards the Bay Meadows area. It's something that our colleagues at Jacksonville Today have been covering quite extensively. Are there concerns about having that somewhat South Bank anchor leave downtown? What are your thoughts about that relocation? Obviously, they're going to try to do it as a cost-saving measure.
They have been, the Duval County School Board, they've been there on the river in South Bank, Jacksonville since the early 1980s. They have been looking to get off the river for quite some time for a variety of reasons, one of which is I think the community's sense is that there's maybe a kind of a higher and better use for riverfront property than a government building. So, they've gone through a very long process. In fact, several years ago, the Duval County Public Schools put out a big RFP trying to find different solutions. Kind of nothing kind of came out of that really kind of fit their cost needs. So this has been really almost a decade-long search for a new headquarters. Now it's become something of an exigent circumstance because as people know some of the fiscal challenges that school districts around the state are facing, not to put too fine a point on it, but the Duval County Public Schools has to find a way to save about $100 million because of some of the fiscal issues they are dealing with. They have proposed now selling the building that they own on the South Bank on the St. Johns River. I think they believe they can get about $20 million for that building, and then buying an office building on the south side of town in what's called the Prominence Office Park to kind of orient people kind of right where Bay Meadows Road meets I-95. There's an office park where Southeastern Grocers has been located. There have been others. There's some state of Florida buildings back there. They intend to buy an office building there for $14 million. So that would net the Duval County Public Schools $6 million, which, this is a time where, cash is certainly at a premium for them. So this is scheduled to come up before the school board at its September 2nd meeting, the meeting that is right after Labor Day. It seems like there's support on the board to make this move, but again, I suspect this will elicit a lot of public comment as well.
All right. Well, Chris Hand, it is always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on this morning. Really, really appreciate it.
And good to see you as always.
All right. Up next, a community-driven program to get kids off screens and into nature. Welcome back. It's been called the indoor childhood, with kids in the U.S. spending 90% of their time indoors or on screens. Here to talk about a program designed to get kids out of that cycle and out of doors we're joined by the executive director of Project One Health, Celia Obaji. I messed it up even though I promised I wouldn't. Celia Obaji, nice to have you here.
Thank you for having us, Ann.
All right. We're also joined by Lorene Husband with the Partnership for Child Health in Springfield. Good morning, Lorene.
Good morning.
So I will start, Celia, with the impacts of this so-called indoor childhood. What do we know about how much time kids are actually spending on their screens and not in the outdoors?
Yeah, so all the studies have shown that kids are averaging about 7 hours on screens, and it increases to 8 hours as they age and get into their teenage years, and only about 10 to 20 minutes outside.
All right. I mean, that seems like a lot. What, in terms of health impacts, do we know about that association?
So our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, he really wrote a report calling the nation's attention to the epidemic of isolation, loneliness, the increasing mental health and physical health challenges that indoor lifestyle and excessive screen time is creating for our youth.
Mm-hmm. And the program that we're talking about today is designed to reverse that trend, or at least chip away at it. Lorene, tell us a little bit about what you're working on in Springfield and what some of this new funding is going to open up in terms of opportunities for kids.
So we're very grateful to the Winston Family Foundation for giving us funding that will extend programming for 3 years for 4 different neighborhoods. So Springfield is one of them, the Eastside community, the Newtown Success Zone, and Brentwood. And we were all granted some funding to do intentional planning with the community, especially young people, to see what they would like to see in the next 3 years. So in Springfield, we're going to be able to activate our park system with intentional programming. We're using our alleys, the S line, as well as the extension of the Emerald Trail.
Okay. Those are all places that kids are going to be able to interact with the world outside.
Correct.
Yeah. And so the goal is to basically give them some programming that they can participate in as an alternative to spending time online or on their phones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we want to make it so easy such that even residents have stepped up and offered their front yards or backyards as natural spaces that they'd like kids to interact with. So they're creating beautiful nature-based gardening, like butterfly gardens, pollinator gardens, food forests intentionally in residential areas, so that literally nature should be outside your door and it shouldn't be that difficult. So you don't have to go hiking. You can go in your neighborhood and just take a minute to enjoy nature and all the things that are wonderful and beautiful about it.
It's a great program. We're going to have to take a short break. We'll be back in just a minute with more.
The Florida Theater presents The Psychology of Cults, a live event exploring how cults form, why people join, and what it takes to leave. Wednesday, October 8th at 8 p.m. Information at floridatheater.com. Museum of Science and History's new exhibition, Mosh Archives, The Story of Us and You, steps you into a treasure trove of memories, now through August 31st. Tickets and information at themosh.org. Life South Community Blood Centers, providing blood and patient services to the local hospitals, serving patients in this community. Donating blood with Life South helps save lives. More at lifesouth.org to find a blood drive near you.
Listen to Anthology on 89.9 HD3 and let the music unlock your memories. All your favorite music from the 60s, 70s, and 80s are always on 89.9 HD3 Anthology.
When it comes to dating these days, most people are feeling kind of blah.
Dating life. My favorite topic.
To date online or not? That is the question.
Why put myself through this?
I'm Amory Sievertson. Is modern dating broken? Are we broken? How do we fix this? That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
Are people getting too attached to AI? An updated ChatGPT model sent some users spiraling. The blowback exposed how much some people rely on AI chatbots as therapists, friends, and even lovers. If we tell our deepest secrets to AI, when is that intimacy helpful and when can it cause harm? Exploring the personal side of AI, next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, I am talking to Celia Obagi. She's the executive director of Project One Health, which is helping to fund a new initiative in 4 neighborhoods in Jacksonville to get kids off screens and back to nature. I'm also joined by Laureen Husband with the Partnership for Child Health in Springfield. Celia, we were talking during the break a little bit about what this, funding is going to do. Can you tell us a little bit about how the neighborhoods were selected and why?
Yes. So when we were looking at what we wanted to do in Jacksonville, we were speaking to a variety of partners, a variety of organizations on the ground, and we knew that we didn't want to choose the neighborhoods ourselves. We wanted the community to choose which neighborhoods to prioritize. But what we did was identify the 4 organizations that we think could do the work really well in their neighborhoods. We looked at how do we leverage and align with other existing priorities like the Blue Zones investment that's happening in Jacksonville. So we put a guideline that we wanted the neighborhoods to be within the same zip codes as Blue Zones. So that was one example. We knew that the Emerald Trail was an important green asset that we wanted to leverage for these neighborhoods and to activate it. So we wanted the neighborhoods within a mile of the Emerald Trail. So we put some basic guidelines, but then we asked the neighborhood lead organizations that Laureen just mentioned to then identify which neighborhoods could meet those guidelines and that could really then be activated to create these nature-based programs that could really transform youth health.
And so some of the partners, including the Partnership for Child Health in Springfield, you'd mentioned Newtown, and the partner there is LISC Jacksonville. On the Eastside, it's Lift Jacks, and in Brentwood, it's Groundwork Jacksonville. And they all have somewhat different approaches to how they want to get kids involved and how they want to reach the community. Can you talk about Springfield, how you began that conversation or got people to weigh in about what they were specifically interested in and seeing in their own neighborhood?
Yes. So we were funded for 5 months to do a planning phase. And for me, because of my training in public health, it's really important that you work with the stakeholders that are going to be intervened on, in this case, children. So we met with a lot of kids of all age groups, and through focus groups, we did intentional walkabouts. We did a lot of activities and asking them, what could this be? What would you like to see happen? So some of the things that, were brought up, even starting with children, were things about safety. There were issues about litter in the neighborhoods. There were things about bringing in assets that could create awe and joy, such as bat houses or splash pads. And those helped for us to, as adults, to start now coming together and saying, this is what we're hearing. So based on what we're hearing, what can we do? And then we also ask caregivers to give us their input, as well as business partners, because this is we're creating a space that everybody who comes to Springfield, whether they live there or they're just coming there to school, for church, to work, they will be able to interact with all the assets and the programs that we're developing.
The challenge is different when you're talking about an urban landscape, though. We're talking about getting kids back into nature, and you're trying to do it in a place that doesn't have as much in terms of that resource as some other places that are less developed and less built out.
Actually, it does. And it's just a matter of when you stop and actually look at it. So, for example, on my morning run this morning, I got a chance to see a raccoon because it was 6 in the morning, and see them in their natural environment, because the urban area has become their natural environment. So how do we leverage people, nature, and the environment, and animals, and we can all create a space where we can all exist together, but in awe of each other and stewardship of one another.
Celia, what do we know about the benefits? I mean, specific benefits for kids if they're going to be interacting with nature.
So Richard Louv, who is the founder of Children in Nature Network, wrote The Last Child in the Woods. And that organization is one of our national partners, providing technical assistance and support to all the neighborhood teams. And what he talks about is that going outside, being in nature, it's allowing kids to become creative, problem solving, more resilient. How many times do kids find themselves in a situation outside that all of a sudden they've got to figure out how to solve? And they do. And then once they do, their confidence goes up. So the idea is exactly the opposite of what happens when they're excessively in front of a screen. When they're excessively in front of a screen, their brain is getting rewired. And that rewiring is reducing attention spans. It's harming their sleep. It's causing them to develop the precursors to depression and anxiety. And so we know by moving them away from the screens and getting them back outdoors, it's the perfect therapeutic benefit to help them really re-engage all the senses and get their brains really maximizing in terms of how they function.
Well, it's a great initiative. Laureen, if people want to get more information, is there a place that they can go if they want to get involved?
Yes, to our website, One Health.
Yes, so we have the projectonehealth.org website, and they can sign up for our newsletter. The newsletter will keep them posted about activities, things that are going on in nature all around Jacksonville. We've developed our social media accounts. So our social media accounts are your accountability buddy. If you look at it on Instagram or on LinkedIn or Facebook, it will tell you to put the phone down and go back outside. And then there's other ways in which we're going to have a public campaign that's going to be coming up, and a 30-day, 30-minute outside in nature challenge.
Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Museum of Science and History's new exhibition, Mosh Archives, The Story of Us and You, steps you into a treasure trove of memories, now through August 31st. Tickets and information at themosh.org. AEG presents Camp. The Columbus, Ohio-based indie band will bring their folk-inspired sound and rich harmonies to the stage at the St. Augustine Amphitheater on Tuesday, August 26th. Tickets available at axs.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.